It is Monday. It's the 2nd of June. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gon-young. South Korea, the U.S. and China may be edging closer to working out a way to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's nuclear program. Now, this is according to Seoul's nuclear envoy, who is now in Washington for talks with his U.S. counterpart. ARIRANG News' Choi You-sun starts us off.
This latest visit to Washington by South Korea's chief nuclear envoy has many wondering if it could offer a turning point for the long-stalled six-party talks to denuclearize North Korea.
Starting with last week's South Korea-China foreign ministers meeting, we've been discussing the conditions to resuming denuclearization talks with countries like the U.S. and China. To that extent, we plan to hold an in-depth discussion with the U.S.
The envoy's remarks hint there may be possible progress on the North Korean nuclear issue ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's expected visit to Seoul this month. When Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently came to Seoul, China asked South Korea to actively push for the talk resumption, to which the South expressed its will to set the pre-talk conditions. In fact, Seoul has taken a more flexible stance on the matter as of late, recognizing there's need for a venue to discuss disarming the North, albeit under a set of conditions. The South Korean negotiator in Washington said this is because the regime conducted 3 nuclear tests, 2 of which took place since the talks were suspended 5 years ago. Therefore, Seoul will seek to mediate between Washington and Beijing as the U.S. insists the North take concrete steps to prove it's ready to give up its nuclear arms before dialogue can reopen. Japan recently agreed to lift sanctions if the North reopens a probe into the abduction of Japanese nationals is another issue of concern. When their nuclear envoys meet Monday, Seoul and Washington are expected to agree that Tokyo should remain committed to the 3 parties' cooperation on resolving the North Korean nuclear issue. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, North Korea is known to have about 70 submarines in its arsenal, but until recently they had never been seen. Evidently looking to flex its muscles to the outside world, a documentary has aired on North Korean state television that flaunts the regime's underwater firepower. Our Park Ji-won gives us a sneak preview.
This is part of a recent documentary aired on North Korea's state-run Korean Central Television. It's the first time Pyongyang has publicly released video footage of its strategically important Romeo-class submarines and submarine base. North Korea is currently believed to have about 70 submarines. Around 20 are Romeo-class, their largest submarines, while the rest are of the Shark and Salmon classes.
It seems like North Korea showed its Romeo-class submarines, although they are rather old models, to promote that it has the capacity to block off all of South Korea's shores.
The documentary also showed recent footage of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visiting with female troop units and encouraging other tank units in their night training. North Korea's state television also showed the inside of Kim's private plane. Experts say North Korea is using the documentary to flaunt its self-defense capabilities. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Well, the icy relations between North Korea and Japan appear to be thawing, evidenced by the recent agreement to reinvestigate the issue of Japanese abductees to the north. But what does this mean for South Korea? Well, our Hwang Sang-hee sat down with Professor Kent Calder of Johns Hopkins University for his insights.
Dialogue between North Korea and Japan could be a chance for Pyongyang to blunt cooperation among South Korea, the United States, and Japan. In an interview with ARIRANG News, Professor Kent Calder of Johns Hopkins University said it's important for Tokyo to refrain from making any separate arrangements.
The heart of cooperation, of course, is the Korea and ROK and the United States. But as a supportive element, Japan could be valuable. And so I think our 3 countries can't afford to see North Korea drive a wedge there. That said, generally, I think some pattern of dialogue, as long as there's coordination behind the scenes among the allies, is important.
Professor Calder said dialogue is key to bringing back Japanese citizens kidnapped by North Korea in the 1970s and 80s. 5 Japanese abductees were returned in 2002, but the fate of several others remains unknown.
In other words, there could well be Japanese citizens still alive in North Korea who never will be able to come home if there's not some process of dialogue.
Once fresh investigations begin on the Japanese abductees, Tokyo has promised to lift sanctions and to reconsider humanitarian aid to the north, reducing Pyongyang's dependence on Beijing. Professor Calder said the possible breakthrough is also a rare diplomatic achievement for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, under whom Japan has seen ties sour with China and South Korea.
I think we're at a period where the Abe administration realizes that it can't be a player on Northeast Asian geopolitical issues without some kind of contact or dialogue with DPRK.
Well, there has been Japan-North Korea talks, and Washington has also been conducting 1.5-track informal dialogue with North Korea. Doesn't that leave South Korea out of the picture?
Well, it's very important that South Korea not be left out of the picture. That's absolutely the case. I've felt strongly for a long time that the credibility of the Korea-U.S. alliance is really the cornerstone of our position in the Pacific and one of the key global elements.
Professor Calder stressed the importance of dialogue, but said quiet consultations between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo must remain intact at any cost. 황상희, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now let's move on to the upcoming local elections in this country. Candidates running in the June 4th elections have hit the home stretch. Now, with just 2 days left until voting day, Korea's rival parties are making their final pushes while downplaying their chances of a big election day victory. 아리랑 뉴스 Kwon So-ah explains why.
With just 2 days before voters take to the polls for local elections, rival political parties are trying to figure out where they stand in key swing regions. Although the media is forbidden from releasing opinion polls 6 days before elections, internal polls within the parties are allowed, and they suggest a number of tight races. The last official poll numbers from last week showed the ruling Saenuri Party had the upper hand in 6 regions and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5. But the ruling party now says it is only certain of victory in 4 regions, and the main opposition party believes it has a high chance in winning in just 3 regions. Both parties are referring to their traditional strongholds. As there are less than 2 days of campaigning left, political analysts believe the two parties are merely trying to boost support and encourage voter turnout by suggesting they are facing unfavorable odds. This was also seen in their reactions to the early voting turnout on Sunday. The ruling Saenuri Party expressed concerns about the high voter turnout among young people, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy said the number wasn't actually that high, considering that the majority of the country's 35,000 soldiers are part of the 16% of young people who voted in advance. Experts say voters in their 40s to early 50s will hold the key to the local elections this year. Kwon So-ah, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, at the nation's top office, President Park Geun-hye has asked her aides to make sure the delayed appointment of a new prime minister has no effect on state affairs. She was speaking at a meeting of her senior secretaries today. President Park said her push for sweeping reforms in the public sector can only be achieved when politicians and high-ranking officials lead the way. Now, introducing her new security advisor, Kim Kwan-jin, he is the former defense secretary, or defense minister, excuse me. The Korean leader then asked him to focus on establishing a security posture and preparing for North Korean provocations. On government restructuring, the president said the duties of the National Emergency Management Agency and current Security Ministry will be transferred to the soon-to-be-established Safety Ministry, which will handle both man-made and natural disasters. Now on to the world of sports, where the decision to have Qatar host the 2022 World Cup has added another layer of controversy. A British daily says it has proof that FIFA officials took bribes in the bidding process, and if they are proven true, a revote is very likely. Our UDN has the details.
It was back in December 2010 when Qatar beat out Japan, the United States, Australia and Korea to host the 2022 World Cup.
I'm speechless because you see my voice. I lost my voice because I screamed so loud. But congratulations, Qatar. It deserved it.
But the bidding process for the global event was entrenched in corruption, according to the Sunday Times. The British Daily says it has obtained proof that Qatari official Mohammed bin Hammam paid FIFA officials $5 million while lobbying them to vote for Qatar. The Daily says it has hundreds of millions of emails, accounts, and documents that detail the payments. The revelations have FIFA facing calls to rerun the bidding competition for the 2022 World Cup. FIFA's Vice President Jim Boyce says he would support the move if the corruption allegations were indeed proven true. The decision to have Qatar host the World Cup had been at the center of controversy given its lack of footballing history, as well as its intense summer heat.
So I think many people were surprised when it went there. So I don't think they'll be surprised that perhaps there are suggestions that it wasn't all above board.
Qatar strongly denies the claims and insists that bin Hammam never had an official role in supporting the country's bid. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
Well, we already know that Koreans work some of the longest hours in the developed world, so you would hope retirement would mean some well-deserved rest. But a new OECD report shows that the average Korean is still punching the clock more than 10 years after the official retirement age. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
In Korea, you might retire from your main job, but that doesn't mean you're no longer working. That's the picture painted by the OECD's latest report on effective retirement age. The report notes the effective age of retirement is well below the official age for receiving a full pension in most countries. Some countries like Korea stick out, as while the official retirement age is 60, the effective age of retirement is over 70 for men. In many European countries, residents are actually retiring a good few years before their official retirement age of 65. Women in general retire a year or two earlier than men, but Korean women are also the ones working the longest after retirement, trailing only Chile. Korean women are working just as many years as men, effectively retiring at 70. Analysts say the figures clearly indicate how many Koreans cannot live on their pensions or savings alone, so they have to search for a new job in their golden years. Government data shows more than half of Korean men in their 60s were economically active last year, with 29% of women in the same age group taking part in economy. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, the chief of Korea's central bank says there are now higher expectations over the bank taking a more active role in sustainable growth and financial stability. Now, in a conference Monday, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said the expectations were brought on by the 2008 global financial crisis. He added that more research is needed for the central bank to pursue different kinds of policy goals. While Lee said the global economy is on the path to recovery, slow growth in China and the high level of debt in Eurozone economies could pose a threat. However, 1 in 3 global financial institutions have adjusted upwards Korea's economic growth forecast this year, setting aside concerns that the Seoul ferry accident may dampen domestic spending and slow down overall growth. Now, this is according to Bloomberg data released today. 33 major global investment banks and credit rating agencies projected Korea's gross domestic product to grow at 3.6% this year. That's similar to the forecast of local financial agencies. Now, of the 11 institutions that revised earlier forecast upward from the beginning of this year, 6 made the adjustments after April's ferry accident. Well, it suggests that the agency did not believe that the Seoul disaster would have a major negative impact on the Korean economy. The divide between large and small companies is widening here in Korea. The Korea Exchange said Monday that the combined net profit of firms listed on the main bourse increased 4.6% on year in the first quarter, while their overall operating income fell 1.5%. But the numbers tell a different story when only taking the top 10 companies into account. Now, they saw a rise in both figures over the same period, accounting for over 65% of the total operating income during the January to March period, compared with just under 61% last year. Now, in terms of net profit, the top 10 companies made up 67.6% of the total, up from 62.4%, racking up a bigger portion as well. Financial authorities are keeping a close eye on the 3 credit card companies that recently resumed operations after a 3-month business suspension following the largest personal data leak in Korean history. Now, they will offer greater incentives for the reporting of illegal practices to entice customers and order firms to send text messages to their customers when a transaction is made on their credit card. Kim Min-ji has this report.
This footage from 2011 shows a credit card issuer urging passers-by to sign up for a new credit card, saying they'll receive free baseball tickets if they do. This is illegal as the value of the freebie exceeds the annual membership fee of roughly $10. To prevent such practices, financial authorities implemented an incentive reporting system back in 2012. The system, however, proved to be ineffective as it was complicated and the incentives were low. But now the Financial Supervisory Service has raised the incentive to 5 times the original amount. They say people who report on illegal methods to entice customers, such as issuing credit cards on the street or offering excessive giveaways, will be able to receive roughly $490 in incentives, up from $98. The stricter measures are part of efforts to prevent credit card companies who recently resumed business operations from engaging in aggressive promotional activities. 3 of the nation's leading credit card firms, KB Kookmin Card, Lotte Card, and NH Noyeop Card, have resumed operations after a 3-month business suspension for their involvement in the biggest personal data leak in Korean history. Financial authorities will also make card companies offer free text message alerts to their customers when they make purchases of over $50 on their cards. Card companies say the messaging service will cost them millions of dollars, but with their profits on the rise from last year, it seems they will begin offering the service in the coming weeks. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Well, last week, Korea's prime minister nominee withdrew his name from consideration following growing public criticism over alleged ethical lapses. An Dae-hee, a former Supreme Court justice, came under fire following revelations that he earned $1.6 million by working as a lawyer in the latter half of last year. And critics suspect that the big payday was due to a tradition here in Korea where former senior judges and prosecutors get special favors in initial lawsuits they assume as lawyers after retirement. Let's take a closer look at this issue. We are joined live in the studio by our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju. Well, welcome back to Korea, Dr. Kim.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you back. Now,
Same here.
First, let's talk about this tradition here in the Korean society. We are learning that the largest portion of former or experts that law firms hire are former government officials, and leading law firms get the largest number of these former or ex-officials, I assume.
Right. These government officials we are talking about, they're separate group from the former judges and prosecutors we were just talking about. So, but anyway, that's focused today. And in Korea, what we're talking about is, as you mentioned, government officials and ex-government officials mostly, actually working in the law firms as so-called advisors and then experts here. And this morning, many of the Korea's newspapers have actually reported their own findings. 조선일보, for example, they're saying 83% of these experts and then advisors in law firms are indeed ex-government officials, and YTN is saying, well, it's a similar number, but they're offering different kind of specific numbers. 조선일보 is saying like they came out with a list of 164, and YTN they came out with a list of 177, whatever. But what you're looking at on the screen right now is a breakdown in terms of which law firms actually got those so-called experts and advisors who have their former affiliation with Korean government here. And what we are looking at is Kim and Jang, for instance, the largest law firm here in Korea, have 66 of them, according to Yonhap News here. And of course, that makes sense because their size itself is the largest in the nation. Baek Kim and Lee is known as Taepyeongyang here in Korea. And their number is no surprise to some of us who already have been familiarized what's going on there. Lee and Ko is known as Gwangjang here in Korea, and their competition is pretty much the same. Yulcheon actually has been known as a firm that has a lot of these folks, but somehow the number 17 is a little bit surprising on the lower side. Shin and Kim is called Sejong here in Korea. And Yoon and Yang is called Hwao. And there are other law firms, of course, that have considerable numbers, but they are not listed one of those top 6, as you can see here. And as I said, these officials, their range or rank in their former government affiliation vary big time. Some of them were like just division directors and bureau heads. Sometimes even ministers are included in this number here, and they have been working as the outside advisors and inside advisors, and then counselors, as well as the experts for these kind of legal affairs and working with the lawyers. So this is an interesting number that we're just being shown here.
So these numbers, how do they break down in terms of their former government affiliations?
Let's take a look at it on the screen here. The finding this morning, according to all these different reports, is bring up the numbers here on the screen here. And the tax officials, ex-tax officials, seem to be ranking high here. What I mean by that is not only the National Tax Service as the former affiliation here, but you have to also add that Korea Customs Service as the former affiliation as well. If you put them together, a high number indeed. And of course, there are the ex-Financial Supervisory Service members, and then Fair Trade Commission that also comes in as a big size in terms of former affiliation as well. And Ministry of Finance is included here in the list, but of course, we were thinking, the industry ministry officials, for instance, would have been ranked big time here. But as we reported before, officials from the industry ministry themselves actually work a lot in the industrial associations rather than these law firms. So this number is focusing on the law firm case. That's why some of our viewers may be finding this a little bit more interesting in terms of distribution. Because, if we look into like financial institutions, obviously we'll get to see a lot larger numbers for those people who have been associated with the Financial Supervisory Service and then Financial Service their committee as well. So this is just only for the law firms.
So basically, just looking at those law firms and whatnot, tax officials, they need not worry about life after retirement, looks like.
Right, several reasons. First of all, tax side, there are lots of details and technicalities involved here. So, of course, lawyers can get a lot of help from the former tax officials. That's one. And the other one is, of course, possibly analysts are saying tax-related litigations actually show clear output. And when tax officials get involved, they say there has to be a big return. That's why, it must be a good business for law firms. That's why they hire a lot of tax officials, unlike in comparison with other areas where the return may be fuzzier here. And also, they're talking about this old practice here in Korea. with the tax authorities where they face their ex-colleagues in trials and so on. Some people say tax officials here become more lenient because they want to get similar jobs after their retirement as well. So those are the allegations here.
Right, that's particularly, or is that's actually the point why the problem arises. I mean,
Right.
if you're just hiring an expert who has many years of experience in that field, that should be okay. But you know,
Right.
that kind of a cozy tie is the problem.
Exactly.
Now, with these numbers being released, what do we see ahead for the public discourse on this topic?
We're hearing rising voice about the need for introducing a law to introduce some kind of law to register these so-called experts and advisors who are working with the lawyers, making it more transparency in terms of what they're doing and how they're contributing this kind of operations rather than letting them just working behind the lawyers here. So that should be a next step, but for that I'm sure we need a lot more discussion coming up.
Definitely so. A lot of time needed and a lot of discussions needed for a reform.
Right.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that is your business today on this Monday. Thank you for watching. Do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.